Hey everyone, and welcome to episode number 45 of the Australian Rock Show. My name is Dennis Gray from the Rockin' and Rollin' Gray Brothers. Today is Sunday, the 1st of November 2015, when this show is being recorded. As you heard from the intro, the boys are indeed back in town this week, and I'm of course referring to the mighty AC/DC. Life for the band has indeed gone on without Malcolm Young, who left the band last year due to health reasons, something many of us never would have imagined. AC/DC with no Malcolm. Yet indeed, the juggernaut which is AC/DC continues on, and the band's Rock or Bust tour hits Australia this month, starting this coming Wednesday, the 4th of November at Sydney's Olympic Stadium. So I thought, to help celebrate their return to Australian shores, we'd piece together a pre-tour show, get everyone warmed up for the tour. Why the hell not? We're going to play some cool tunes. We're going to drink some cheap chilled beer. We're going to check in and chat with respected rock journalist Murrray Engleheart. He is the author of the best-selling book on AC/DC titled Maximum Rock and Roll, which has just been revised and fully updated in time for the tour. Folks, it is full steam ahead, or as the voiceover lady says, better buckle up and hang on, because we're cranking the volume and have got the pedal well and truly down. Let's kick off with something from Phil Rudd's album from last year. Yeah, you probably thought I'd start with some AC/DC, didn't you, folks? But let me just come right out and say what many rock and roll purists like myself think. This band are just not the same without Phil. The swing, the soul, the sound, the beat, it just ain't there. And it's noticeable, as it was after the flick of the Switch record, though I do think Chris Slade is doing a fantastic job. Phil Rudd's personal issues are well documented, but let's put them aside for just one moment as I state what so many other diehard fans are thinking. The guy should be drumming on this world tour, no doubt. Sure, I completely understand the reasons he ain't there. The band are big business and have a tour to do, and you want a guy who's committed and giving it 100%. But I just wish there had been some way to get him on the road. He has more than paid his dues, and losing him, especially after Malcolm's exit, was a double blow which could have been avoided. It's still AC/DC, but it just ain't the same. Anyway, here's to the great Phil Rudd, a guy whose history dates back to Buster Brown with Angry Anderson and Geordie Leach. He also did time with the great Lobby Lloyd and the Coloured Balls. You ain't forgotten in our world, friend. Anyway, here, from last year's Head Job album, is Phil Rudd with his band, and the song is called Sun Goes Down. Lifted from Phil Rudd's Head Job album, that was the track Sun Goes Down. As everyone knows, a hell of a lot has happened within the AC/DC camp since the last time the band were here on the Black Ice Tour, including the well-documented departures of Malcolm Young and also Phil Rudd. You can read about these recent happenings in the just-released 2015 edition of AC/DC Maximum Rock and Roll by journalist Murrray Engleheart, a guy who I've known for 20-odd years now and a guy who knows AC/DC backwards. We checked in with Murray earlier in the week to get his thoughts on the band's upcoming tour, the lineup changes, what the future may hold for AC/DC, and lots more. Let's hear the chat with Murray now. Murray Engleheart, welcome to the Australian Rock Show.
Thank you very much, mate.
Now, your 2006 book, Maximum Rock and Roll, The Ultimate Story of the World's Greatest Rock Band, has just been reissued. Now, mate, I should send you a photo of my original copy, as it's dog-eared, coffee-stained, well-read and crying out to be replaced. So an updated edition is not only timely for me, but it also coincides nicely with the band's Aussie tour as well. And so much has happened since 2006, so a revised edition really was required, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's additional interviews and things like that, and detail you didn't come across the first time around. But the major stuff, of course, is poor Malcolm and, oh my God, Phil Rudd, you know. There's a new chapter on Phil, and whoever thought there'd be a chapter in any book on Phil Rudd, with the greatest respect. He was always the guy just laying it down rock solid at the back of the stage, the guy that didn't say anything, the guy that was never seen anywhere, and all of a sudden he was fucking everywhere on the front page. In fact, I think his exploits, was it last year?
Yeah, last year.
Last year, his exploits, somebody was telling me, gave AC/DC their biggest mass exposure ever. And I thought, well, there you go, you know. And for all the wrong reasons. So a pretty extensive chapter on Malcolm and Phil, and just a few other bits and pieces, some extra interviews from people who were around back in the day and that type of thing. So it's come up really well, yeah.
Okay, now I recently interviewed Ron Clayton, long-time TMG roadie, who knocked around with Malcolm a lot during Mal's 12-month stint with Velvet Underground. Mm-hmm. You've included more about Malcolm's early Sydney years in that revised edition, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. That was courtesy of the ever wonderful Herm Kovac, who is probably Malcolm's closest friend to this day after 40 years. Yeah, all sorts of fascinating insights, like the Velvet Underground used to do a version of The Who's Won't Get Fooled Again, and it was Mel that was doing the that synthesizer passage in the original track. Mel was doing that on guitar, which of course later sort of morphed into the opening of For Those About to Rock, which not many people knew about. That sort of stuff. Yeah, Herm's got a million stories, and one particular one was when the Velvet Underground played in, where was it, regional New South Wales at one point, and it was a Friday night gig, and Malcolm was still working at the Burleigh Bra factory, and wasn't able to always get time off work. So on this occasion, rather than driving, they thought, well, fuck it, we'll fly him up there, because it's the only way you can knock off work and get to the gig in time. And Herm said they met him at the airport, and here's this little guy, first time ever on a plane. And here's this guy, little guy, gets off the plane, struts through the airport, cigarette in hand, little bag in hand, like the sort of, well, not rock star, but he just sort of, was playing the part, strutting through the airport and everything, and they were all cracking up. And as Herm said, who would have thought, like 40 years later, that the guy spent most of his life on a plane, and that was the first time he'd ever been on one. Lots of little stories like that, which are kind of nice.
Now, you won't have heard it just now, but I was ranting at the start of this show about Phil not being in the band, an opinion shared by many. I think he should still be there. Now, I'm not sure if you ever saw very early AC/DC with guys like Noel Taylor or Peter Clack behind the kit, but I have sure seen the lineups with Rudd, Simon Wright, and also Chris Slade. I was at Donington back in 1991, and without Rudd, the band really do lose their swing. And no disrespect to Chris Slade, but that thumping auto drive which he provides. And Malcolm has himself mentioned that Phil's vital drum sound was lacking from the band's years without him. I recall him stating that after Rudd rejoined for Ballbreaker.
With Ballbreaker,
what's your take on current day AC/DC? Let's start with Chris Slade in for Phil Rudd on drums.
Oh, look, as Malcolm says in the revised book, Slade's probably the best musician they ever played with, full stop. I mean, the guy's credentials are just absolutely stunning. He came within inches of missing a solid gig with Elvis. He played with Tom Jones. He's just been everywhere and done everything since then. But it's horses for courses. I mean, Phil Rudd sort of invented the modern day sort of rhythm dialect that you don't do fills because it fucks up the roll, it fucks up the swing. You just keep drop. If you go through all of AC/DC's records that Rudd's on, certainly probably up till including Back in Black, I think there's like 3 or 4 rolls on like 6 records. It just doesn't. Or if you listen to someone like Keith Moon or Bonham or Ginger Baker, it's like, all the time. That's part of the, or somebody who's really good at that sort of stuff was Rat Scabies from The Damned.
Sure.
His whole thing, like Moon, was just rolling, his whole thing. But if you listen to Ringo Starr, and if you listen to Kenny Jones, and you listen to Rudd, it's a whole other thing. It's a whole other rhythmic stride. And he was sort of on the beat and behind it as well at the same time. And I think that's sort of missing. But by the same token, Phil sort of set the template. I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing. But the fact that he's not there, I think, is a shame, right? But the guys are in a pretty difficult position, I think. But
The show must go on, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. They had a world tour to do. They had an album to do. I mean, he was 2 weeks late getting to the studio to do Rock or Bust.
Mm.
You know, so even at that point, I was thinking, fuck, you know, come on. We got Malcolm, you know, sidelined, and now we'll get this as well. Right, you know, come on. So, but once that rhythmic template's established, I think it's not too difficult for someone else to slot in behind it, but you're never going to be the master.
How close was local drummer Mick O'Shea to landing the gig?
I understand he was pretty close. He was pretty close, like in terms of shortlisted. That was the word. That's what I was hearing. If you know Mick, Mick's such a sweetheart, and he's such a driving drummer. He just pounds the shit out of the drums. Mick's big fallback was he's about 18 feet tall, which mightn't have worked in that band. But for a rock solid driving drummer, he would have been absolutely perfect. He just would have had to stay on the drum stool the whole time and not stand up. That's all.
I saw him with Angry not too long ago, and it just would have been a great story to have him land the gig. But you've obviously heard Phil Rudd's Head Job album. I really enjoyed it. Your thoughts? Oh,
you could see where it was coming from. And as he said to me, as Phil said to me, you know, I've heard a few decent riffs in my time. You could see where it's coming from, but it's those sort of things have a funny life out on their own, if you know what I mean. The mere fact that album even happened was, I think, symptomatic of the fact that Malcolm wasn't in the picture. There's no way in the world Malcolm would have tolerated, with them staring down the barrel of a new album and a tour, there's no way in the world he would have tolerated Phil going out doing that sort of stuff on his own. Just wouldn't happen. Wouldn't happen. That last year must have been just absolute fucking bedlam. It looked, I mean, behind the scenes, it looked pretty difficult from where we're sitting, right? But, oh man, no, that just wouldn't have happened, mate. Malcolm would have very, very firmly made the point, mate, you fucking reassess your priorities and you do it now. Because there was even stuff on, at one point, Phil was on Facebook, or someone for Phil was, you know, outspruiking the album. And I thought, wow, again, you know, like I said, whoever thought there'd be a chapter in a book on Phil Rudd, with the greatest respect, apart from being the greatest drummer, rock drummer.
Sure.
But whoever thought Phil Rudd would do a solo album?
No, it's mind-boggling, isn't it?
And do it in the lead up to an AC/DC album. Something's going off the
Chaos.
rails there.
Chaos is the word, isn't it? So how do you think, Murray, that Rock or Bust stands up in the AC/DC catalogue? It's solid. It's not as instantly palatable, I didn't think, as, say, Black Ice was, but overall it's a solid record, I think.
I think it's pretty solid, actually. And I think one of its greatest merits is everything's pretty tight and punchy. You know, there was a Jerry Lee Lewis record that came out a bit before it, and it clocked in at like half an hour. And I think Rock or Bust comes in about the same time. And it was just, I don't know, I think one of the greatest ever songs, and no one ever knows it really, but is Down Payment Blues. I just think that's an absolute fucking masterpiece, lyrically, rhythmically, sonically, everything, and no one knows about it. But they can pull the stuff off like that with ease, but they're still really good at 3-minute songs. You know, really 3-4 minute songs, and that's what the album's about. And it works for me. I think it's fine. You know, I've got to say, I sort of had, I thought, how is this going to work? But Angus is going to absorb so much of Malcolm, who absorbs so much of George. You know, they know what to do. It's just instinct for them.
What's your gut feeling? Do you think we will get another album, or will this be it?
Mate, that'll be up to Angus, really. It really will. He's sort of shouldering the load now. He Malcolm was calling the shots, like for many, many years, and even though everybody still thinks Angus is the guy, you know, it's Malcolm's band. He formed it. He runs it. Well, he ran. You know what I mean? And I think maybe Angus will think I've done the album in homage to my brother. We've done a world tour in homage to my brother, pretty much. Maybe that's enough. Or maybe you'll think, look, Mel would want us to keep going, so we're going to keep going. It will depend on Angus. It really will. And who knows where that's going to fall.
Time will tell, I guess. And I guess what is remarkable is that, like so many of us, could never have envisaged AC/DC permanently with no Malcolm. Yet what's clear is that apart from Angus, everyone else has proved to be replaceable, which is remarkable, isn't it?
Well, yeah, once Angus is the last man standing, pretty much. And the interesting thing about that is AC/DC, like the Ramones and the Stones, everybody thinks of being this sort of ever-present rock-solid unit. Where the Ramones were actually pretty fluid, went through a lot of guys later stages. And the Stones even in the promo pictures, there's 4 guys now, not 5. And it's the same thing with AC/DC, really. It is weird that Malcolm's not there. But by the same token, of all those guys, I think Malcolm could walk down the street most easily.
Sure, okay.
You know what I mean? And Malcolm was the guy who spent most of the gig right at the back of the stage, right? And only came up to the front to sing choruses. And most of the time was out of the spotlight. So really, I'm not sure how many people, there are millions of fans, I'm not sure how many people would readily identify Malcolm anyway. Do you know what I mean? Angus is the one in the spotlight.
Well, I think that nephew Stevie Young is a good replacement for Malcolm, who officially filled Mal's shoes in September of last year. Now, a lot has been written about him replacing Malcolm, but one good thing to emerge from the lineup change is that fans are taking time to discover his work with Starfighters, who were right up there with the great late 70s, early 80s UK bands. Some say as good as UFO, which I don't agree with, but it's an interesting side note. You know, people are discovering that band. You've no doubt heard the Starfighters material?
Sure. When he first came in, when Stevie first came in to take Mel's place, when he was taking some time off to deal with his drinking, Angus gave an interview, and it was really interesting. He said, Stevie knows how Keith Richards plays, and he knows how Ike Turner plays. And he said, that's enough. That's more than fucking enough. You know, that's anybody that knows those grounding points is more than up to the measure of stepping into this band. I thought that's a pretty interesting thing to say. But yeah, I mean, he's a bit of a dark horse, Steve. You're quite right. And just slipped like no fanfare or anything. I mean, he was certainly working with Angus long before it was announced.
But that's what you need, someone who can just walk in and do it. But look, my brother and I once owned a 12-inch single by his former outfit Starfighters called Alley Cat Blues, which is without a doubt one of the best songs to come out of the new wave of British heavy metal era. And if people think Stevie ain't got the chops, think again. You know what? I think we might cut to a song now, mate. I've got Alley Cat Blues buzzing around my brain. It's such a ripping tune. So let's take a quick break and air some Starfighters with the track Alley Cat Blues. From 1981, that was Birmingham outfit Starfighters there, featuring current AC/DC rhythm guitarist Stevie Young and the song Alley Cat Blues. Murray, where and when was the first time you saw AC/DC live?
Oh, where would that have been? A couple of times. One that stands out was at a community hall in Eastwood or Repping in Sydney, and somebody threw a can or something at the stage, and Bon nearly jumped out and ripped their head off. That was one that's memorable. The other one was a really interesting one at Warwick Farm Racetrack, actually. Maybe 75. They were playing in the middle of the actual track. In the 70s, they did a lot of shows like that. A lot of bands did a lot of shows like that. And so they're in the middle of the actual track, and it was raining. So I guess there was 200 people there. And they were pretty big at the time. And Bond came out and gave us a few drinks, and he came out and there was this scaffolding around the stage, and he started doing chin-ups on the scaffolding, and of course the scaffolding started to shake, so the rowdies were racing out saying, "Mate, get down, you got to get down, you're going to pull it down." And that was fantastic, but it was just really weird in this huge expanse of the middle of a racetrack and 200 people. But they were just fantastic.
Mate, I want to dig into your book and pull out just a couple of my favourite stories, one of which is when Rose Tattoo played a gig out at Parramatta's War and Peace Hotel around 1978, which is where Angus was walking around pretty much unnoticed until he borrowed Coxie's guitar and jammed, and it was only then that the punters figured out who he was. That's a cool story. Pete Wells and Angus Young in the same band. That would have been something.
Yeah, and a very pissed off Mick Cox. You know, that was amazing. I mean, it was I forget what street it's in. The disco was called War and Peace, and it was just straight something out. But I was there, and it was just straight out of Saturday Night Fever with the raised coloured dance floor and everything. And I think it was a Tuesday night, and Tattoo were playing, and it was one of those places with a low ceiling. And of course, the Tats always had this sort of triple four-way, this massive sound system in this small room. And there wasn't many people there, and there was a few bikers and stuff, and it was just a pretty sparse crowd, and Tattoo played, and that's fine. And we were sitting down, and we saw the angry at the bar, and he was with a bloke about the same size as him, who had this big, long greatcoat on. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Sort of waved to Angry, how you going? And then they both went backstage and disappeared. And I thought, that's funny. Then out comes Angus. And it was just fantastic. They played I Hear You Knocking, that Little Richard song, and they played a blues, and they played something else. It was fantastic. It was like the best 15 minutes that anybody's ever done in their lives, really, really great. Really. And like I said, again, 200 people, and even after Angus was, out in the crowd rolling on the ground, people were still thinking, who's this little guy? People just didn't get it. I mean, this was when Power Age came out, because he'd come back to Australia to do promo for Power Age, and they'd been slaying it in Europe and America. And here he was playing this little disco before 200 people, and half of them didn't know who he was. It was really weird.
Another great one, mate, is when Swanee was headlining out at the Family Inn in Rydalmere, January of 1980, and during the encore, Bon, along with Barnesy, got up and jammed on some Zepp and Chuck Berry. Some Australian rock and roll history sure as hell took place that night, didn't it?
I don't know whether people that drink at the Family know that story or not, but every time I walk past, I grew up around there, and every time I walk past her, I think, fucking hell. Like, talk about hallowed ground. I mean, the Family was one of the great pubs in the late 70s, early 80s pub circuit in Sydney. Big beer barn. Probably get, I don't know, maybe 800,000 people in there. Great gigs, just really, really great. And for Bond to do basically, his last ever Australian appearance, literally in my backyard, it was like 5 minutes from where I grew up. It's like, wow. So like I said, I'll drive past it or walk past it every now and then now and go, Jesus, that's cool.
As you just mentioned, the Family Inn really was one of Sydney's iconic live venues back then. And I believe that it was Motorhead, correct me if I'm wrong, who played that venue around August 84, who were partly responsible for the venue closing its doors to live music due to noise complaints.
A mate of mine...
Possibly?
Was doing it, probably. A mate of mine was doing a poster run that night and dropped off some posters for a gig the next week. And he said he walked up I think there's about 2 or 3 steps once you came inside the doorway. And he said it was so loud, he said something in my brain said, nah, you can't go in there. You can't. I'm shutting down. I'm physically not letting you walk into that room. He said it was just unbelievable. I didn't see him there. I saw him, what was it? Because I couldn't go to that show. I saw him somewhere else. And they were pretty solid. I mean, that's the whole thing, But that actually... Motorhead, there's a story in the revised edition when they were out here for the 1916 album, and they played at the Hordern Pavilion in Sydney. And I was there to interview Lemmy before the show, and they were doing sound check. And the Hordern's like you've been there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Hordern's just like concrete floor, or certainly it was concrete floor and all that sort of stuff. And the roadies were doing this thing, and they called it. I said, the sound of like an aeroplane landing in your toilet. This incredible white noise, sort of. In the book, I call it metal machine music, sort of noise.
Mm.
And one of them said to me, one of the crew said to me, it's called pink noise. It's to tune the PA. Like, fuck, it was so like brain-crushingly loud, this screaming frequencies. And then one of them said, oh, that's nothing. And they put on, I guess it was a cassette or a CD of Back in Black, and they just turned it right up. Again, a completely empty concrete floor room, right?
Mm.
And everybody just sort of stood there for as long as they could. And by the end of Shoot the Thrill, the place was completely empty. Even the roadies left and closed the doors. This noise was, and actually that was louder than Motorhead themselves.
Wow.
It was so fucking loud. But I thought, there you go, the loudest band in the world using Back in Black as a yardstick. I thought that's pretty cool,
We could talk about Motorhead all night, but I'm getting off track. There's a photograph in the book of Brian Johnson fronting Geordie at Checkers in Sydney on Geordie's 1974 tour. Mm-hmm. And I'd like your take on something. Now, I've heard so many times that the first time the Youngs encountered Brian Johnson was when he auditioned to replace Bon. I find it hard to believe that the band's paths never crossed, or one of the Youngs didn't see him, because in February and March of 1974, Geordie toured fairly extensively around Australia, playing with a bunch of great bands, including Hush, Lobby Lloyd and the Coloured Boars, La-Di-Dahs, Buffalo, Sherbet, Thorpe. They also did that aforementioned gig at Checkers, a venue which AC/DC were also performing at around that time. What's your take on that? You think George or Malcolm spied Brian way back then and filed him away?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think this is detailed in the book, I think. I think Malcolm saw him at Checkers, and Angus saw Geordie at Hornsby Police Boys or something like that. They both definitely saw them. If you go through, and it's pretty well documented in the book, if you go through, there's all these things that happened to them that they made mental notes of. Like the thing I mentioned about the staccato passage in Won't Get Fooled Again. Sort of ended up, years later, becoming the opening to For Those Who Had the Rock.
Mm.
Right? Seeing Brian at Checkers when Mark Evans left the band. Angus and Malcolm went to see the Deep Purple Free Mantra Band show in 1971 in Sydney, and were really impressed that the bass player for Mantra Man, Cole Pattinson, kept playing while a roadie changed a string on his bass. So when Mark Evans left the band, one of the people I looked up was him, because I knew he was solid. There's this, they just file things away. Yeah, and one of the things in the new book is when they first went to the UK in April 1976, they were rehearsing on a farm on the outskirts of London, and at the front of this farm were these cannons. So that got filed away, and and come For Those About to Rock. It's really interesting. People say, look, it's just, detractors say it's just dumb rock by, there's not much intelligence in it. And really, when you look back through it, there's some pretty detailed notes or mental notes being taken right throughout the whole process.
Mate, just going to put this out there. I know the past can never be altered, but I've always loved the idea of Heaven's Alan Fryer filling Bond's shoes. And I often wonder how songs like Flick of the Switch would have sounded with Alan. I'm a rock and roll dreamer, aren't I, Murray? Of course, Alan sadly passed away earlier this year. Always remembered fondly by the Gray brothers. But how do you think? What's am I a dreamer there?
Oh, mate, you would have killed it. Alan had... There's a couple of really great voices that come out of Australia. One's Andrew Anderson, who I think's got the phrasing of Sinatra. He's a fucking great singer. John Swan, and Alan Fryer, Bon, of course. But Alan had an incredible range. I don't know whether you remember seeing them doing Whole Lot of Love, seeing Heaven do Whole Lot of Love. He had an incredible range. He would have just beaten that up. But I suppose Alan's thing, as somebody said to me, Alan's thing was so much like Bon. He was just almost Bon Mark II, but with a greater octave range. But he would have eaten that stuff up. Him on Back in Black, Jesus, that would have been something.
How close
and he came so close. He came so close.
What about Stevie Wright? How close was Stevie really to getting the gig to replace Bon?
Nah.
No.
No.
Okay.
There's a couple of, when those sort of things happen, names pop up. Chisel were huge at the time, so Jimmy's name came up. Angry's on Albert's with tattoos, so Angry's name came up. Same with Stevie, but Stevie was never a chance.
By the way, I had a friend tell me they recently bumped into Stevie a couple of weeks ago down on the New South Wales South Coast, which is great to hear. Little Stevie is out and about and doing okay. Mate, getting back to Geordie, in my opinion, there isn't enough information out there on Geordie's 1974 tour down under. I know the Buffalo did a couple of supports. Did Pete Wells ever mention those dates to you?
No, he didn't actually. He didn't.
Okay.
But in those days, it was pretty much. I'm working on a revised version of Blood, Sweat and Beers at the moment, and there's a quote from Dave Tyson there, where he says, we weren't making $1 million a week by any means, but it was just non-stop party and getting treated like stars, and everything was a blur. So I suppose I suppose that sort of covers things. You know what I mean?
I wasn't going to play any Geordie, but why the hell not? I want to make this particular episode informative. The band had some pretty good tunes, including 1973's All Because of You, which still sounds great today, and it's a tune we're going to cut to right now. Let's take another break and crank some Geordie. From their 1973 debut, Hope You Like It, that was Geordie with the single All Because of You, a song which peaked at number 6 on the UK charts, of course featuring the distinctive vocals of Brian Johnson. Though if you explore the band's musical offerings, their guitarist Vic Malcolm had a great guitar sound as well, I think. We're chatting with AC/DC biographer and longtime Australian music journalist Murrray Engleheart. Murray, is it true that Bon got his idea to put Angus on his shoulders after seeing Brian Johnson do that in Geordie, whom Bon's outfit Fang, previously known as Fraternities, had supported? Possible?
That's possible. Well, Brian was doing that in Geordie. That's quite possible. But I think Dave Evans was doing it in Rabbit later on too, so that sort of balances that out. It's possible, mate. Yeah, it's possible.
Why do you think there is so much interest in AC/DC nowadays, especially with Bon? In the early to mid-'80s, if you think, it was mostly headbangers here in Australia who remained loyal to the band, and I can't recall massive media support like it was for Black Ice when they toured with the Party Boys back in early 88. Why do you think there's so much interest nowadays?
I think people have sort of grown up with it and grown into it. My analogy is men of all ages want to be Angus because it's just a form of release. You can act like an asshole for an hour and no one really minds and dress up like a school kid. Women like the rhythm and want to go to the party that Angus is going to or clearly going to. And people have grown up with it, mate. It's a bit like the Stones, except the Stones, there's a release factor with AC/DC there isn't with the Stones, if you know what I mean. The Stones have sort of become this sort of majestic, graceful thing, where AC/DC are probably still the loudest thing on the planet. The biggest show, the sweatiest show, the loudest show. And I think that's it. But they've become, they're not a rock band, they're a rock brand now, I think. And that's the crucial difference, I think. And you know, I was saying to someone the other day, no one goes to fancy dress parties as Robert Plant, right? And there's no streets in Europe named after Van Halen, right? It's just they've become part of the social fabric, and it's partly the devil's horns, it's escapism, it's Angus.
It's similar to Kiss, isn't it?
In a sense, yeah. And they've been around so long, and they haven't changed. Like I said, the Stones sort of late 60s Altamont period were just like Satan's helpers. And then they sort of morphed into something a bit different with, black and blue and all that sort of stuff, and it's only rock and roll, which sounds like they gave up, which they sort of did. Where AC/DC just haven't. They've just been this constant for more than 4 decades, and people just absorb it. I mean, I know people who don't like rock, who don't like rock and roll, don't like rock music, but love AC/DC. It's like, wow, there's a thesis in that somewhere.
Yeah, and there's something in that, and you mentioned of the early history, and you get a lot of people nowadays, much like Kiss fans, they just want to take in the hits, hear the Cannons, see Angus, and I know people who take the kids along like a circus. Just they don't care who's in the lineup, and a large chunk of the crowd, that's the demographic.
Yeah, it's a cultural institution. It's like going to the cricket. It's like a barbecue on Australia Day. Everybody just loves AC/DC. It's what you do.
What about the band set list? It's pretty predictable, and I think, I don't know, maybe as a purist, it'd be good to see them vary it up a bit. I know they can't drop the stuff everyone wants to hear, but maybe, I don't know, I'd like to hear something like Guns for Hire or Nervous Shakedown. Sink the Pink would be cool, just to add some spice. I know it's not going to happen. What about Rockin' in the Parlour? That'd have punters scratching their heads.
Yeah, that'd be go. Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite records of theirs is Flicker the Switch. I just think the sound and the attitude and it's hugely underrated. Like, no one mentions it ever. I mentioned Down the Blues before.
It was bargain bill. It ended up in the bargain bins here. Yeah,
it's got a great groove. This House is on Fire. The opening, that's fucking huge. It's just a great sounding record. But look, I think the set list right now, I mean, I think people are going to be blown away. Even people who think they know what they're expecting are going to get blown away with these shows that are coming up. And look, songs that they play, they've been playing overseas, Have a Drink on Me. That'll do me. That's just fantastic, that song. I mean, so if there's stuff like that in the set, that's very good enough for me, mate. That'll be fine.
Do you think this country, more so Sydney, does enough to preserve and indeed celebrate its rock and roll history? I touched on this when I had Dave Evans on the show earlier this year. A plaque or something should be installed down at Victoria Park near Broadway, site of the first AC/DC gig with Angus in the school uniform, which leads me to the Young Family's Burwood residence located out there in Burleigh Street. Now, I believe that 2 years ago the National Trust included the property on the National Trust Register, which is wonderful, but I don't think that's enough. Other cities do it. What's your view? And I guess when are we going to see Murray the E offer AC/DC/Sydney sightseeing tours for local and international fans? Good idea or what?
With my walking frame. Yeah, we'll see, mate. Look, yeah, I think you're right. There's an enormous heritage here that isn't celebrated the way it should. And there's lots of guys. There's lots of people just dotted around the scene who are, in their 60s now, who never really got their due in the first place. And once they're gone, they're gone. I mean, if I can just cross over for a second, one of the themes of the Blood, Sweat and Beers book was that's just an era that's completely gone. It's like big band jazz. It's just gone now. Between, the sounds changed, the bands have changed, the audience have changed, work health and safety laws have come in. The whole thing's different now. The entire thing's different now. And a lot of it's just, like you said, that a lot of it's just goes uncelebrated, unmarked. It's just an era that everybody thought was fantastic, and it's off in the distance somewhere. So yeah, something to commemorate it, but it comes down to dollars and cents too. That's the other thing.
Well, what you touched on then was one of the reasons my brother and I really wanted to start this podcast, to get a lot of those guys who are in their 60s, get their stories down and preserved for future generations, because it's important more than anything.
No, it's God's work, mate. It's good stuff.
Murray, it's been really great to chat with you. I cannot give you enough praise for your book. Maximum Rock and Roll. It's the go-to book for people like me, and indeed anyone who has a love of AC/DC and Australian rock and roll. What projects are you currently working on? You mentioned Blood, Sweat and Beers, which is there's a revised edition out when?
There's a revised edition coming out in February.
Okay.
With a whole stack of interviews I've dusted off that I didn't know I had, with Robbie Lloyd and Peter Wells and people like that. And a bit of a nod to people like Doc who have left us. But that's out in February. And then there's a bigger project out late next year, which I'll talk to you about later.
I might want to point out the Ian Ryland photographs in that Blood, Sweat and Beers book from 1998 are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, that guy really nailed it, didn't he?
Look, I can't let you go without choosing an AC/DC song. What would you like to hear and why?
Oh, mate, I'd have to go back to Down Payment Blues. I just think as a structured rock song, it just doesn't get any better by anybody. From the opening to the breakdown, the solo, and it's fantastic. And the way the two guitars mesh, I just love it. And Bon, Doing Nothing Means a Lot to Me, just killer fucking lines. It's just tremendous song. More people don't know it.
Great choice. The book is called Maximum Rock and Roll. The fully revised 2015 edition is out now, available online and in all major bookstores. Do not call yourself a fan of AC/DC if you do not own this publication. Murray, thank you once again for your time today. It's been really great chatting with you.
Thanks very much, mate.
For Murray Engleheart, that was, of course, AC/DC with the song Down Payment Blues. You can buy Murray's book titled Maximum Rock and Roll at all major bookstores, also online. I know that our friends at Fish Pond have Maximum Rock and Roll for the amazing price of $24, which includes postage. Christmas is only a few short weeks away. What an ideal present for the AC/DC or music fan in your family. To take advantage of this deal, head to AustralianRockShow.com. Click on the cover of the book and go for it. Fish Pond are one of our affiliates, and if you purchase the book via this method, it's a win-win. We'll get a small kickback, which helps to keep this podcast free, and you get Maximum Rock and Roll, the ultimate story of the world's greatest rock band, for an amazingly low price. If you, like us, are heading along to the opening night of the tour, or indeed attending any night of the Rock or Bust Australian tour, and you want to learn about AC/DC, everything you want to know and more is in Murray's book. You just heard me mention AC/DC's 1988 Australian tour to Murray when the Party Boys had the support. What a great band to open up proceedings. Swanee, John Brewster, KB, Kevin Borich, all seasoned musicians whose paths often crossed with AC/DC in the 70s. Of course, Quo's Alan Lancaster on bass during that era of the Party Boys. Swanee and indeed the Angels had some tour supports on the Back in Black tour back in 1981. Great memories. On this upcoming run of AC/DC shows, and I can feel a rant coming on, we've got the Hives from out of Sweden opening the shows, along with local Melbourne outfit Kingswood. AC/DC, one of this country's best-loved rock and roll bands, are back on home turf, and we've got the Hives and Kingswood as support bands. Give me a freaking break. You want to get the people warmed up, fired up, adrenaline racing in the rock and roll zone. You know what I'm saying? Why not have two kick-ass Australian bands opening up? Take a listen to last week's show where I played a bunch of amazing metal bands coming out of Australia. World class. The Hives and Kingswood. Can't I have Cold Chisel or indeed the Mighty Angels opening the shows? The Tats? Airborne? Screaming Jets? Choir Boys, anyone? Baby Animals are still out there kicking ass. What about Sydney's Black Label? How cool would that be? Nope, it's the Hives and Kingswood, who are often referred to as Australia's Queens of the Stone Age. Cool, man. Actually, brace yourselves, folks, as we take a quick listen to the powerful sounds of Kingswood and their song, I Can Feel That You Don't Love Me. You Bruise, the same as before? Are you kidding me? Who the hell decides the tour supports these days? Let's hear a bit more, and if it don't get any better, I'm going to blow these wimps away with some Black Label. Oh yeah, if you are listening to this podcast from outside of Australia, that was Sydney outfit Black Label and their tune Big Talker. Yes folks, as you heard from that song, this country, the place which gave you AC/DC, The Angels, Rose Tattoo and most recently Airborne, still produces loud and proud, straight down the line rock and roll. And Black Label are a band who you should search out. And if you live in Sydney, make an effort to go and see them live because they always deliver the goods. I do know that they often have Angry Anderson doing some guest appearances as well, which is too damn cool. Head to blacklabelaustralia.com.au for more info. Okay, before we exit, why don't we run through some of the AC/DC tour dates which take in the months of November and December. Sydney, Wednesday the 4th and Saturday the 7th of November. Brisbane, Thursday the 12th and Saturday the 14th of November. Adelaide, Saturday the 21st of November. Perth, Friday the 27th and Sunday the 29th of November. Melbourne, Sunday the 6th and Tuesday the 8th of December. The band then do a couple of New Zealand dates, Wellington on Saturday the 12th of December and Auckland on Tuesday the 15th of December. Well, I hope today's show got everyone warmed up for the AC/DC Rock or Bust tour. In the mid-70s, there was a copy of TNT in our household, which is where our journey with this band began. It's a journey which, for like so many of us, has never ended. And some of those tunes, particularly with Bon, still knock me out of my seat when I hear them. Okay, let's get out of here. AustralianRockShow@gmail.com. Email us and give us your thoughts on the show. Are you digging it? Is there a band we should be aware of? We don't bite, so please email us and say hi. You can find us on Facebook. We are also on Twitter if that's your thing. Be sure to visit our website at AustralianRockShow.com. All the past episodes are there for you to enjoy. And you can also hear the show via iTunes, Stitcher and TuneIn. Again, our website address is at AustralianRockShow.com. Thanks again for listening, folks. We're going to close out with some current AC/DC, and you know the drill by now. If you're listening in whilst driving, turn the volume up and roll the window down so you can educate others. Lifted off the Rock or Bust album, Let's Play Ball. This is Dennis, out.